Welcome back to another guide, and today we're going to be talking about shields. What are shields? Shields are a massive source of damage reduction, which improves your survivability, and they are usually based on your MP pool or your HP pool for some specific relics. Shields will reduce the damage you take by 80%, and the amount of damage they can retain from these 80% is usually based on your mana or your HP. For instance, here for Dragon Taming Water, it will check 50% of my MP, and that will be the amount of damage it can take. Every point of damage I take will be reduced by 80%, and these 80% will be discounted from the shield pool I will generate from my 50% mana, which means that the bigger my mana pool is, my MP, the bigger my shield will be. However, this damage reduction will always be 80%. That is a fixed value, which means that you will never be truly immune to damage. You will always take these 20%, even if you have 100% shield uptime. These shields, they have a fixed duration. For instance, this one lasts 11 seconds, and they can also be broken if the enemy deals enough damage to clear my shield pool before it ends its duration, which means that very high burst damage can break your shield and make you vulnerable. It's also important to keep in mind that everyone aims to have 100% shield uptime, which means that sometimes you might want to use relics to supplement your ability shields in order to achieve 100% uptime. This means that magicka players will be using trigrams along with their ability shields, or maybe more trigrams, just trigrams, so a flask, or even a robe if they want to make a stronger shield. It's a completely different mechanic. We will get there eventually. And corporea players might want to use the mace or even a bracelet to steal shields and whatever. So everyone wants to be using shields, even corporea and sword players. However, their ability tree does not have shields. Neither corporea or sword, they have this, which means that they will have to go to the magicka path early on and get one of these. What people do usually at the mortal world in the early realms is focus on their main path and then set magicka as their secondary path, which means that every time they get lower path EXP, for instance from blessing pills, which is something you get from being a high rank cultivator, this thing here, let me see, this thing. If you are really high in cultivation, you will get these pills daily, and they give you experience to your lower path, which means that they will be focusing on their main path, which is corporea or sword, and will be slowly building up the realms of their magicka path. Eventually, they will be able to push magicka to nascent soul or even virtuoso, and that will allow them to use these abilities here. It's completely fine to use magicka shields if you're not a magicka player. It will cost a lot of MP, but you should have enough to sustain at least one or two shields. The hard part at the early game is getting here to use them. You should usually focus on your main path and only dedicate your main EXP and cultivation and pills if you have completed your main path, for instance incarnation 100%, then you can consider going to magicka path to get more abilities. But usually you just let the secondary EXP pills and other sources of secondary EXP do that job. Anyway, everyone will be using shields. Early on you will be getting spiritual wall or windwalker if you have enough EXP. They are both really good, and these are some things to consider when deciding which shield is best for you. The first thing you have to check is how much MP scaling they have. For instance, this one will take 33% of my MP pool and will generate a shield based on that, compared to Windwalker, which will do 37% of my MP pool and will last 9.3 seconds. So we can see that while Windwalker has a bigger shield, it also has a longer duration. There's the stage penalty, but it's 20% for this and 15% for this, but let's not get there now. It's just because I'm very high stage, this won't be an issue for you. So initially, Windwalker will seem better, bigger shield, longer duration. One thing to consider is that your shields will not always be broken, so the duration is actually useful sometimes if the enemy doesn't do enough damage to break them. In that case, Windwalker would be more useful. However, there are more things to consider. The things they grant to you while active. If I use Windwalker, I will get Wind Sweep, which will give me magic evasion, which makes me more likely to dodge magic attacks. It will also give me physical evasion, 42%, which will also last 9.3 seconds, which make me more likely to dodge physical attacks. So we can see right off the bat that this is a very powerful defensive shield that will make me effective against both types of damage, both magicka and corporea. And this is usually a really good option if you have a lot of corporea players in your server, because it gives you a lot of P evasion. So that's a really nice thing. And then if we check Spiritual Wall, it gives me Crit Res, which is a very handy stat, and also gives you Purify, which will remove a negative effect. For instance, if I have a debuff, like the red affecting my character, let me duel someone so you can see what the debuff is. I can check here. Replay. This thing here, these are debuffs, they are affecting the character negatively, and Spiritual Wall and Dragon Taming Water and Flask, they will be able to remove these effects immediately. They cannot remove crowd control things like a stun. It's not considered a debuff, but there are many things that will affect your character negatively, like make you take extra damage, deal less damage, be slower, things like that. So very powerful stat to have in a shield, especially with such a low cooldown, which is 25 seconds, compared to Windwalker, which is 38 seconds. So the one good thing about this one too is that it is better for sustain. You will not use as much mana as Windwalker comparatively. So these are your two options for Mortal World. For Magicka players, you might be using both of them and then some trigrams. They're both really good. You just have to check if you need Purify or if you want to be more likely to dodge attacks, and if there are more corporeal players in your server. Then there's the third thing to take into consideration, which are the advancements. If you click here in Advance, this is a way of improving your abilities. They will give you some type of buff or increased damage, and they will show here how much you will be getting for each level or advancement. For instance, if I put this ability to +1, I will get 6.4% crit increase for 2 seconds, which is a good offensive stat. It will make me deal more damage, more likely to crit. Crit is a very powerful mechanic, which can absolutely destroy the other player. If you land a good crit on them, it might break shields instantly. Very good. That said, if we look to Windwalker here in Advance, it will make me immune to debuffs for 1.8 seconds. That's an extremely powerful effect, which can also be considered as some form of Purify, because you will be immune to the debuffs. It's like you're getting them and getting rid of the debuffs immediately. So while Spiritual Wall removes every debuff you have immediately when active, Windwalker does that for 1.8 seconds, no matter how many debuffs you get within that time window. So that's very powerful, really useful, especially at the beginning of a combat when enemies are throwing a lot of abilities at you. The duration is fairly small, 1.8 seconds is very short. It's like 2 abilities at best they can throw at you during 1.8 seconds, but it can still be very useful, especially when combined with a shield like Windwalker, which can give you a lot of other defensive abilities. If we go to Spiritual World here, we have Dragon Taming Water, and Dragon Taming Wood. Generally, people will tell you to use Dragon Taming Water. The cooldown is fairly long, so you have to take that into consideration. The shield scaling is very high, especially compared to the Spiritual World shields. It lasts longer, 11 seconds. It doesn't have the realm penalty because it's a void break ability. Not even void break, yeah, void break ability. And it also gives you the Purify, the same as a Spiritual Wall. So it can be seen as an upgraded Spiritual Wall with higher scaling but longer cooldown. It's a very powerful ability which can work on almost any character. Then you have Dragon Taming, which has a slightly lower cooldown, It has smaller scaling, a shorter duration, but it gives you magicka evasion. So it can be kinda good against magicka players. The smaller cooldown makes it more useful in longer fights where you will be using your rotation more often, but at the same time Dragon Taming Water offers a better and stronger shield. And in terms of advancement, it will give you magical defense, which is not the best stat. Defense itself, it's not very useful, especially at the higher tiers where you might have a gap of penetration, which will reduce the effectiveness of your defense by a lot. But it's definitely something at least, and it has a long duration. 3 seconds at level 1, that's really high, and it can go up to 20% for 6 seconds. But I definitely wouldn't tell you to invest in that many advancement guides into this. At least one level at best if you decide to use Dragon Taming Water. 3 seconds, 14%, very good deal. One single advancement is like almost nothing. So yeah, good deal here. If you check the advancement of Dragon Taming Base, it will give you magic attack. So corporeal players definitely won't be using this advancement. It's not useful for them. But 2 seconds is kind of okay. It can go all the way up to 3 seconds for 14%. It's also a good deal. It's not very expensive to go to +5, but at the same time, extra attack is not as powerful as you would think, but it's better than nothing. Like if you're improving all your damage abilities and you're going to +6, which is very expensive, it might be a good idea to first get this to +5 or even +1, which is pretty much free. And lastly, you have Dragon Taming Wood, which will give you 6% magic attack, and it doesn't generate a shield. It's not even a shield. So yeah, this is why people completely ignore Dragon Taming Wood, because it doesn't even provide you a shield. So you won't be using this. Even if you decide to use it, you will still need to have other shields to protect you. So yeah, it's just a buff, and the buff is absolutely garbage. It will increase your M attack. This will raise with levels, right? You will increase the level of your shield, and it will provide you more attack. But compared to things like voltize, which is what Corporea gets, this is pretty much worthless. And the effects here give you magic evasion and crit res, which is very ironic because I'm using this offensively, like to get more attack, but then it gives me defensive bonuses, which is kind of counterintuitive. Like, what do you want to do with this ability? You want to deal more damage or protect yourself? If I want to survive for longer, I just get a shield, right? So, yeah. And also 10% crit, which is okay. 10% crit for 5 seconds is powerful, but at the same time, it's not a shield. You will be wasting an ability slot just to have extra magic damage and crit. It's definitely not worth compared to one entire ability instead of it. And then we go to the relics here. Magicka will be able to use trigrams since the start of the game, and it's just a shield, an active, which will provide you shield based on your MP as well. It has a fixed amount of flat MP, which is not very high. Most of your shield will come from this percentage here based on your MP, and it has a limit. The downside of relics is that they have a cap. Abilities, they will always scale with your MP, and no matter how much MP you have, it will be giving that amount of as shield. But trigrams and relics in general, they have a limit, so past a certain point of HP or MP, they won't give more shield than that. Usually that's not a problem, but it makes these shields not be as good as ability shields. That's the reason why you don't see people usually running just trigrams or not running any ability shield, because they don't provide special effects. Like, they give these basic stats here which are not really good compared to abilities, and they have a limit, so they won't usually be as powerful. It's also worth mentioning that the cooldown is really long, 38 seconds, so if you're using trigrams, you will need at least 4 of them alone to cover what maybe 2 ability shields and 1 trigram would do, and not even as effectively because they have a limit. Then after you reach Void Break and start messing with Demon-Fi things, you will have the Demon-Fi relics. For instance, this is the flask. You need to be Divinity Magicka to be able to use this, and this is a really powerful relic. It gives you a shield, It can be used if you are stunned, which is extremely important for magicka. Many times you will be losing duels because you get stunned, you don't have a shield active because it was broken or it ran out, and you're stunned. You will take damage directly to your HP pool for the next attack, and you just lose. You lose like 70% of your HP, or you simply die. That's something that happens very often, and there's not much you can do about it. You can have a good ability order, but people will always get lucky with a crit. They will stun you, and you die. It's something that happens. So this is a really good way to remediate that, to counter this potential issue, because it can be used while you are stunned. You won't be able to use this just when you're stunned. If it is in your ability order, it's the next shield in queue. It will simply use it. It doesn't care if you're stunned or not. Like, let's say that my next shield is Dragon Taming, and then a trigram, and then flask. If I get stunned during Dragon Taming, and Dragon Taming runs out, it won't skip the flask just because it's the only shield I can use while stunned. It will try to use the trigram, and it will fail. So while being able to use a shield while stunned is really powerful, it won't automatically solve the problem for you. You have to keep a good ability order and be prepared to know when you will be stunned, and then have the flask right next as your next shield. So yeah, very good, but you need to order it properly. You need to check your duels, know what is happening in order to make use of it effectively. And then lastly, it also removes debuffs. It instantly removes up to 4 debuffs, which usually is pretty much everything you have. It's very unlikely that you will have more than 4 debuffs, so that pretty much works as a purify. And the shield amount is usually higher than a trigram. Cooldown is the same, but higher shield limit. Relic is the flask, usually the relic that everyone recommends to divine magicka players. It's a very powerful relic and very useful on many situations. So that's a really good contender for your first relic if you're a divinity. However, if we go to Demon Fight Temple here and go to Conquest? No, not yeah, it's Conquest. If you go here, you will see that the first Demon Fire relic that you unlock is not Flask. It's the second one. So you won't have this right away as soon as you start interacting with relics. You will have to clear a few conquest stages, and it takes some time to unlock the flask. The first relic you will have is the robe. And what this does, it's make an MP shield, and then it allows you to use other shields to improve the strength of this active shield here. It will last 7 seconds, and it's pretty much a way of making a very sturdy shield for your character, and it can stack with your other shields. Usually you cannot cast more than one shield at a time. If I have Dragon Taming active, I won't be able to use a Trigram, I won't be able to use a Windwalker. It will be active until the previous shield goes off, then I can use the next one. With this you can skip that, you can use as many shields as they are present in your ability order, and it will make your current shield stronger. This is usually not a very good relic. It can definitely work and be better than not using any relic at all, but you need to have a very strong MP pool because it will drain your MP very fast, and it's very weak to burst. As you progress through the game, you will have better sources of burst damage. You will have fields at wholeness. You will have your array at void break. People will start using offensive arrays like Daji with Tom Leddy. It's a very high source of burst damage, and that can definitely break your sturdy shield, which would be the robe. So people usually abandon robe at some point. They might be using it early once it's unlocked just to have fun with it. It's a cool new relic, especially compared to the normal relics. It's very fun to use, very different. So yeah, it's a good toy to play around early on, but it usually is not a good thing to use later on as you have more options and the game expands in terms of damage. And then lastly, you have the Corporea shields. We go here, we can check the first one, which is the bracelet. And what this one does is drain the shield of your target. It will reduce the shield by 40%. and then 90% of what it gets from that draining will become an HP shield for your character, which is a very powerful thing to do. You're both offensive by reducing the shield of your target, which can be a really good one, including robe, and then it will convert that value to a shield to you. So yeah, you're doing two things. You're making yourself more defensive by getting a shield, and you're also breaking their shield. Very good. However, this is a very situational thing because it won't be used if you have a shield active. So let's say I have a spiritual wall running, I won't be able to cast bracelet. So you need to make your ability order properly in a way that you don't have a shield currently active. The other target has a shield. It usually has to be a good one to make this be worth it. If he's just using a trigram, it's a weak shield. You will be draining a nearly worthless shield and they will cast another one immediately. So very situational. You need to know what you're doing and you need to not have a shield active at the time. So people usually will use this, but not in a very effective way, and it will actually be a detriment to their character. So be very careful when using bracelet. It's also the first relic you unlock. It's pretty fun. It can definitely be a very strong relic, but you need to know what you're doing. That's what I'm trying to say. But it's also fun to play around until you get better options. But it's definitely a valid option to not use any relic at all and just wait until you have the actually good Demonfy relic, which is the third one here, the Cosmos Mace. This thing will simply give you a shield based on your HP. It's the equivalent of magicka shields, I guess, but it's based on your HP pool. Since Corporea players have a really high HP pool, you can see that this is very powerful to them. It no longer scales with MP, which is what the magicka ones do. This is a weak side of Corporea. They don't have a lot of MP. It might also be a problem where they will run out of MP during duels because of their shields, and that problem is solved entirely when you have a shield that scales exclusively with your HP. It will cost a bit of your HP, like 10% of your remaining HP pool to cast a mace, but that's definitely worth it and justifiable. It's completely fine. It still makes it a really powerful relic. You can see that the limit is higher than the magicka ones. This is 15.96. We had like 14, I think. Let me go back there. This one is 11, and the other one is 14.95. And it's even more powerful than the magicka shields. So yeah, usually everyone, once they unlock the mace, that's what they will go for, and it requires you to go demonic corporea. So keep in mind that if you decide to use the different Demonfy path, like I want to be divine corporea, I want to be demonic magicka, you won't have access to these relics. You won't have access to flask, and you won't have access to mace and the bracelet. So which ones you should use? In order of priorities, I would say that once you have the relics, you should use them. Very powerful. They will cost extra to upgrade, but the usefulness they provide to your character is really high, and it makes it worth it. Then you need to check the ability shields and see which ones fit your character the most. For instance, right now I'm using Windwalker because it's really good defensively, and my character overall is really strong defensively. I want to reduce as much damage as I can so I can survive for longer. So that's the best one I have right now, and it gives me the immunity, which is very powerful as well. I have the flask for removing debuffs, I have the immunity, and I have the other abilities which also work around that. It's working well for me. But really consider the other shields as well. They can be useful for you, especially early on. Spiritual Wall and Windwalker will be useful at all stages of the game. Even with the stage penalties, they are still powerful. Just take into consideration what they provide to your character, and if you can afford them. Don't forget that they cost MP, and if your character is running out of MP because maybe you're running too many ability shields, or maybe you're using a shield that costs extra MP compared to the other one, that's something you have to take into account as well. Definitely equip them, try them out, duel other people, see if you're running out of MP, if they are actually providing you any value, see if you're not wasting them. For instance, if I use Dragon Taming Water right away, which purifies negative effects at the start of a duel, I won't even have debuffs on my character yet, so I'm wasting one very powerful effect for nothing. You might want to use a different shield early on in order to not waste your purify. That's something you have to think about as well. But the key point here is that you have to try them out, check the logs, see what they're doing for you, see which ones are giving you better survivability, if you can afford them in terms of MP, and then make a good balance with your relics as well. Try to not use too many shields, see how many you need to keep 100% uptime and don't go beyond that, because you will be wasting relic slots, you might be wasting ability slots. So yeah, if you see if you can remove one trigram and still be able to duel, not have any gaps in your shields, get rid of them, use a better damage relic, and I think that's about it. These are the things you should consider when picking up shields. All of them are kind of good. Some are better than others, but yeah, that's it.